All right, now we are going to go on to section 7.1.4, and we are still trying to determine if triangles are congruent. So we're going to be given lots of different examples of sets of triangles, and we're going to see if we have enough information to say whether the triangles are congruent. We are still focusing on our angle side angle and our angle angle side triangle congruence. And I want you to make sure that you still have your 713 notes handy, because we might be referencing some of those properties we just talked about. Okay, so let's start with number 43. Let's look at part A. On this one, we have some information in our picture that we need to figure out what we actually have. So first off, I see that L is 56 and angle O is also 56 degrees. That means we know that L and O are congruent angles. I also see that angle M is labeled 95 and its corresponding angle is J, but I don't actually know what J is. We can use our triangle angle sum theorem to figure out J, or if I look at everything that I know in my first triangle, I could solve for what that angle measure is. So if I look, I know that all three angles add up to 180. So the measure of angle J plus the 56 plus the 29 is going to be equal to 180. Measure of angle J, then I'm going to combine like terms. So I should get plus 85 is equal to 180, and I can subtract the 85 to get what my angle measure is. So the measure of angle J should be 95 degrees, so I can label that in my picture. Now we know that angle M and angle J would be congruent because they're both 95 degrees. Then I see that angle K is 29. We could go through our solving to find angle N, but if we already know that angle M is 95 and angle O is 56, and it matches up here, we know that angle N would have to be 29. Again, you could go through the solving, but it is going to show it that same way. Okay, so based on the triangle congruence that we've talked about before, we have had angle side angle and angle angle side. Looking at these, since I do not know any of my side measures, I cannot use either of those triangle congruence theorems. So because we don't have a side length mentioned, we do need to just say we don't have enough information and that these triangles are not congruent. We would need more information in order to state for sure that they are congruent. They could be completely different sized triangles but still have those same angle measures. We wrote this in our notes before, but I'm going to write angle, angle, angle and put a cross through it because that's not one of the triangle congruence theorems that we've talked about before. So not enough info, so we're going to have to say they're not congruent. So we have to have all the information for angle, angle, side, or angle, side, angle to say they are congruent. Okay, let's go on to part B. For part B, we have some of those markings that we talked about on the back page of our 713 notes. So I notice that I have some right angles here. I also notice that I have the arc marks with the ticks on it right there. And I see that I have an overlapping side DB. This is actually the exact same picture from our 713 notes over our different properties. So we've seen this picture before, at least briefly. So I can look at what I actually have. I have an angle right here. I have a side, and then I have another angle. In my other triangle, I have an angle, a side, and another angle. So I see that these are angle, side, angle to be proving them congruent. even though they don't look congruent, we can't just assume they're not. We have to look at the information given to us. The markings on the triangle will tell us even if they don't look congruent. So since we see that they are angle, side, angle, we can prove that they are congruent that way, we are going to make a flow chart proof to show that, okay? All right, so I'm gonna start with my angle here being congruent to my angle here. They're both those right angles. And we have our given statements. So I'm gonna start with the measure of angle ADB is equal to 90 degrees in one bubble. And I'm going to say that is given. And I'm going to say that the measure of the other angle is 90 degrees. Measure of angle CDB is 90 degrees, which is also given. We have not worked on naming angles, but you can see I'm following it around. ADB is representing this right angle right here, and CDB is representing this right angle right here. So we do have to name them with those 3 letters because there's more than just angle D right there. All right, then I look at that side in between. That is side DB. So I could say side DB is congruent to itself, side DB. That's going to be our next bubble. This is, you might think it's given from the picture, but it's actually one of those properties we talked about in 713. If something is congruent to itself or equal to itself, it is our reflexive property. So I'm going to give the reason there as the reflexive property. And now we go to the other angle, the ones here by point B. So again, we do have to say that they are congruent, and we have to list them with all 3 letters. So I have the measure, nope, I'm not going to say measure, I'm going to say angle ABD is congruent to angle CBD. So again, I'm just following the 3 letters around, A, B, D, and C, B, D, okay? That one was marked on our picture, so we can write given for this one. So there's a lot of information so far, but it is going to help us prove that these are congruent by that angle, side, angle. We have one set of congruent angles and one set of congruent sides. So we need to turn this into one other set of congruent angles. So let's draw our lines to show that those 2 are leading to the fact that those 2 angles are congruent. So I'm going to use the same letters I used up here in the previous bubbles. And I'm going to say angle ADB is congruent to angle CDB. And we wrote these on a lot of our proofs on our last set of notes, but we know they're congruent because we know the definition of congruent means the angles are equal. So I'm just going to say definition of congruent. So we have proven that 2 angles are congruent, sides are congruent, and another set of angles are congruent. So we're ready to say that the triangles are congruent. So we're going to bring all 3 of these together to one last bubble, talking about our triangle congruence. So I have triangle ADB would be congruent to triangle CDB. We talked about triangle congruent statements. Really watch that the order is correct. And our reasoning for this one is angle, side, angle congruence. So your flowchart proof may look a little different than mine, just how you set it up. But as long as you have the arrows or the lines connecting the correct things, we should have the 2 90-degree angles coming together to show the angles are congruent. Then we have our sides and our other set of angles, all of those coming together for our triangle congruence. Okay. I'm going to skip over C, so let's go to the top of the back page, and let's see what we have on this one. So I always like to analyze the picture first to see what information the picture tells us, and then if we have enough information, we can make our flowchart proof. So I'm going to go ahead and highlight. Use those highlighters at your table if you want. I see side BC is labeled 6, and DC is also labeled 6. So those must be congruent. Angle BCA and angle DCE are marked with the arc mark, with that one tick mark, so that they must be congruent. But then I see this side here, EC is marked 4. I don't see another side marked 4. We might think it would be here, but since it's not marked on our picture, we cannot assume that it is 4. We have to go off of the markings. So I'm going to, very good. I'm going to go ahead and say that we don't have enough information to prove that these are congruent because we don't have 2 sets of sides and an angle. We are missing this piece of information here. So I'm going to say not enough info. It cannot be determined because we don't have another piece of information. So we're going to say not congruent for now. We only know one side and one angle. All right, one last example, and then we'll save number 45 for next class. Let's look at example E. All right, I see angles here with 2 arc marks. Those would be congruent to each other. Angles here with 1 arc mark. Those would be congruent to each other. And then one that might be kind of tricky to recognize is if I have this triangle here, ACB, and this triangle here, ADB, I see that they are overlapping on this side right here. If they're overlapping there, that means they share that side. So this would be a side in both triangles, AB. So that's going to be one set of my congruent sides. If I look at what I know, so I'll go back to, let me highlight this so we see what triangle I'm focusing on. If I'm just focusing on the one I have highlighted in blue, I have an angle, another angle, and then the side. I can look at my other triangle. I have an angle, and then the side. So even though they're overlapping, it makes it a little hard to tell. I still see that I'm going to have angle, angle, side congruence. Okay? Because we see that, we're going to make a proof to show our reasoning. This one will be pretty basic because everything is mentioned in our picture. So I know that angle D is congruent to angle C. And that was given to me just from the picture. I also see that these 2 angles here with the 1 tick mark are congruent to each other. Since there's more than one angle at point A and more than one angle at point B, I have to label them a little differently. So I'm going to say angle CAB is congruent. You can see that angle there. That one is congruent to angle DBA. So that's another bubble, and that was also given And then we talked about AB being the shared side in both. So that would mean segment AB is congruent to segment AB. And then think about what property this is meaning. If it's congruent to itself, we used it in a proof on the front side, and it's one of those properties from our notes from last section. This is our reflexive property. So you might think it's given, but we need to make sure we state how we actually know, and the reason we know is reflexive. So that really just gives us all the information we need. So we're ready to state our triangle congruence statement. So triangle BDA, and the order that you put these letters in does not matter. I'm just choosing an order for the first one and making sure I follow the same order for the next one. So I did B, D, A, so I have to go A, C, B. Your highlighting should help you on that one. So use that to help you follow the corresponding sides and angles around. And then we already said this is angle, angle, side, congruence. So that is the reason for the triangle congruence. Okay, so we have our few examples of flowchart proofs, some where they don't work and some where it's angle, angle, side, some where it is angle, side, angle. So just really paying attention to the information that you're given. And like I said, we'll save number 45 for next class. So that is all for 714.